Ready?
All right, so Daniel Esser is going to talk to us about getting filthy rich in rising Asia.
Okay, so I wish I could actually tell you something based on empirical experience on how to get filthy rich in rising Asia. I can't. I never got rich in rising Asia. And as you will see, this is actually not about me. This is about you. So you will be getting filthy rich in rising Asia. And in the process of getting filthy rich, you will have plenty of opportunity to reflect on your own ideas and conceptions and preconceptions of development. And of course, that concerns you, and it also ideally concerns all the students in your courses and seminars. So before I proceed, I just want to say that there are lots of used copies of this book out there. It has been published by different publishing houses in different areas of the world. So if you are inspired by this brief 10-12-minute presentation and you want to read the novel, if you haven't already, then please try to find a used copy to save a tree. So can I just see, let me actually go here and try to see as many of you as possible. How many of you have read this novel? Can you do the jazz hands if you've read the novel? No one has, no one? Okay, let me ask you a more basic question. Do you read books?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so there's a good base layer for you to eventually read this novel. Do you read novels? Ian, what went wrong in your life that you're not reading novels?
Well, let me change that to this one.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I was hoping you would chicken out of that answer. Great. Okay, so most of you do read novels, so I think there's a good opportunity that you're going to find something interesting in what I'm eager to share with you here. So first of all, I wanted to walk you through the author's stylistic choices, and I'm doing that on the basis of book reviews that have appeared in a few outlets, most of which I think you're going to be familiar with. The first one appeared on NPR the year the book was published.
We are only seeing part of your screen.
Oi. Is that the case for everyone?
I'm seeing the whole thing.
I can see everything.
Okay, all right, good. Maybe something wrong with mine. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I get 30 seconds extra from Raj now. Thanks, Raj. All right, so Alan Shoes on NPR wrote this about the novel. The book's exemplar is a country boy on the make, always referred to in the second person, as you. Though there's a danger some will find the structure and form of address forced or artificial, you, the reader, quickly gets caught up in Hamid's extremely detailed account of a life of upward social mobility in what we usually regard as a caste and class-bound part of the world. And Parul Sehgal in the New York Times wrote, by supplanting the traditional role of choice in the novel, but with chance, by defining characters by their modes of survival rather than their personalities, Mohsen Hamid puts powerlessness at the center of his story. And by turning from his cast of terrestrial drones to the aerial drones silently monitoring their progress, he signals powerlessness on a global scale. So I think in some way this dovetails quite neatly with the chat conversation that was evolving yesterday afternoon Eastern time about cynicism. How can we avoid cynicism? How can we maybe not empower in a neoliberal sense, but at least kind of create some hope and maintain hope in the minds and hopefully social circles of our students. So those are the author's stylistic choices, which are really important to keep in mind to kind of understand that this is, in a sense, a riff on a self-help book, but very much written by one of the most stellar novelists of our time, whose work is very much rooted in what we sometimes call the Global South. So let me next turn to the novel's storyline, and I'm going to do this in 2 blocks. The novel has, if I remember correctly, 12 chapters, and so I wanted to have 12 lines here, but I opted to merge a few and also not to give you a complete chapter by chapter overview. So I'm going to give you the storyline in 10 points. First, we learn that you are a third-born sickly son who, with his father, moves from a village to a sprawling metropolis. We don't know which metropolis that is, although those of you who are familiar with South Asia will very quickly have a pretty good idea of which metropolis we're talking about, but the metropolis is never identified in the entire novel. You encounter modernity in crisis, corrupt education, inefficient planning, and the rise of technology that includes many but also excludes many. You, as a teenager, meet strangers, you explore your sexuality, and you run up against social norms that you were not familiar with when you were living in the village, but that really seem to mark the diversity, or one aspect of diversity of this life in metropolis. You then go to college where you experience collective action, and you also realize that there is some political clout and social organization, but that power can also be abused. When you graduate from college, you get induced to capitalism by learning to innovate, to network, and also to betray and to fake it, right? So basically all the individualistic qualities of capitalism is what you get induced to. So armed with that knowledge, you launch a fraudulent water bottling business because you know that water is a scarce resource, and you have realized that by taking tap water and boiling it, you can sell it then as clean water. And you are actually really, really successful doing so. You eventually manage to beat out most of your competition because you resort to nepotism and also to violence. You have some of your closest competitors threatened into letting you pass on the left lane, or in England on the right lane. You rise in social status as you reach your midpoint in life, and you begin to align yourself with political military actors. So specifically, you realize that if you really want to go ahead as an entrepreneur, you need to be you need to fall in favor with the political military actors in the country in which you are operating your business, which, you know, we never know which country it is, although anyone who can guess where Mohsen Hamid is from, or where kind of his roots are, will know which country we're talking about. And then in the final third of your life, or really final quarter, you experience declining health, you receive death threats, and you also, because of some business misfortunes, you experience rising personal debt. And then the novel comes to an end, and you're confronted with financial ruin, and a few years really only before you die, and the novel ends with your death, you accept the primacy of basic needs, most of all love, and you finally get together with the girl whom you first met and first had sex with on the roof of your dilapidated slum building in the metropolis into which you've just recently moved. And you trace her and you find her and you finally get together with her, and you realize that, you know, life is sometimes about the very basic needs and not so much about the money that you've made. So over your life course, and again, please remember that I'm talking about you, we get a sense of development as a cross-sectional historical process. So your life begins in very late colonial times. It kind of then is intermeshed with the politics of independence. Most of the novel actually takes place during the process of uneven globalization, into which, of course, you plug right in because you have a fraudulent water business, and you know that, you know, this is something that you can really leverage if you understand how globalization and uneven needs work. And then towards the tail end of your life, as you're already in cahoots with the military and some very powerful factions, you also realize that the global war on terror is kind of the backdrop against which late, or maybe not so late, global capitalism is unraveling. So at the beginning, you explore agrarian vulnerabilities. You grow up in a village where, you know, defecation happens right behind the mud house in which you live. Your parents make love in the same room in which you and your siblings sleep. So it's all a little bit awkward. It's all very volatile. You entirely depend on the climate, the weather, the harvest, and eventually it becomes clear that there is just no survival for your entire family in the village. And so your father and you move to the metropolis. You experience this rural-urban transition, but you also see how kinship's relations are carried over from village networks into this sprawling metropolis. You realize that it's impossible for you to get a job in the formal sector, so you gain informal employment, and you witness primitive accumulation. Some get rich by taking away from others, including actually having them maimed or murdered. And then you really engage in Peter Evans's embedded autonomy. So you understand that you do want to take the cues from the administrative caste and the military, but at the same time you need to retain enough autonomy to run your business, which ultimately, of course, is based on a fraudulent premise, which you know full well, but you think that that is really the fastest way for you to get filthy rich. You understand as you grow older that there is what I've called here normative hybridity, meaning that there are different norms that run into each other. And most of all, you are of course interested in your business continuing to thrive, but you also notice some moral shifts that really are increasingly difficult. At some point, it becomes clear that your own son, to which your wife, which you then leave in order to be with the pretty girl from your youth, your own son is actually now in Canada because he came out as gay and he sees no future in this sprawling metropolis, and he instead wants to be on the other side of the globe, which gives you great grief, even though you personally believe that his identity may not necessarily what you wished for him. You see this in the context of increasingly cross or transnational migration. And of course, you also take advantage of globalization by outsourcing parts of your own business. You witness environmental degradation at large scale, but you're really not particularly worried about it because ultimately, really, it's about you getting filthy rich in rising Asia. And towards the end, of course, as your business starts falling apart, your life starts falling apart, you see how these processes of transition from independence into uneven globalization produce a monopoly of violence by the state that is really brittle and that is constantly being challenged. And you experience what that actually means from the perspective of a business person. So once you've read that novel, I think that there are 4 themes for self-reflection. And I'm sure if you read it, you're going to come up with another 4 or another 8 or 12 maybe. And I'd be really curious to hear back from you in a few weeks or months, if you've actually taken to it, what you think the most fruitful themes for self-reflection are. But I wanted to tease out 4 here for you. And the way I'm going to do this is analogous to how I started the talk. So first, I'm going to give you a quote from a book review or a quote from the novel itself. Then I'm going to give you an idea of what kind of pedagogical exercise you could do to explore this quote or this particular strand or topic within the novel. And then I'm going to give you the question for self-reflection that I think works well, at least for the students that I've been working with on this novel. So Andrew Anthony in The Guardian wrote, "This is what it's like for huge swaths of humanity. And here's the opportunity for the privileged reader. Literacy in these circumstances is a privilege, to grasp something of the ordeal in being this anonymous you." So the starting question really is, how do different expressions of poverty affect intersecting areas of life? And if you've read the novel, you will immediately have a multifaceted answer to this question. So in order to structure student inputs, I've been working with an analytical matrix. So different expressions of poverty, different segments of life, different forms of life, and kind of ideas from the students of, how we can see examples of how poverty may express itself. And on that basis of that matrix, the reflection question, which effect of poverty strikes you most and why? Somewhere in the novel, Hamid writes, quote, "Your city is not laid out as a single-celled organism. It also lacks governance powerful enough to dispossess individuals of their property in sufficient numbers." So kind of stunted primitive accumulation. Accordingly, the poor live near the rich, and that's a great opportunity to explore inequalities and spatial inequality. Again, starting question here could be, how does modernization produce and reinforce economic inequalities? What I've been doing with my students to explore this question further is a textual analysis. And on the basis of that analysis, a reflection question along the lines of, how does modernity look different from below? Two more themes. This one, again, based on the novel itself. Your technician scratches his armpit pensively. Maybe we skip the boiling today, he suggests. No, you say, no, we don't boil, we don't sell, because you know that quality matters, especially for fakes. For me, that's a great opportunity to talk about formal and informal institutions and the role of institutional formation in the process of economic development, and to apply scholarly literature that many of my students, at least at the outset of the course on global inequality and development, find very challenging to wrap their minds around. And on the basis then to kind of reflect, can your actions be justified? Can your fake business actually still play a role in what kind of development? Or is development ultimately predicated on morally just actions and coalitions? And last, again, Paro Segal in the New York Times says, you teach us how to lose. Slough off your wealth like an animal molting in the autumn. And in Washington, D.C., where I've been living for 11 years, we currently have the cicadas coming out. They're all molting. Slough off your wealth like an animal molting in the autumn, Hamid writes. Look up the pretty girls of your youth. Find someone to play cards with. Have an exit strategy. And that's the title of the final chapter, because it ends with your exit into the nirvana. So the question then, thank you. The question then is, what are micro and macro affordances and costs of economic growth? Because I certainly wouldn't want my students to walk away from a course on economic development, global inequality, thinking that there's something inherently problematic with economic growth. I really think that that is certainly something to reflect on in the 21st century, but when we study the history of economic development during the 20th century and what it has done for billions of people, I think we need to think about both the costs, but also the affordances of economic growth. And I do that in an open-ended discussion leading up to the final reflection question that I wanted to share with you, which is, how might development be different from what you thought it is? I think we have about 2 minutes for questions, and I look forward to hopefully answering them. Thank you so much.
Great presentation, fantastic.
We've got 1 minute for questions.
I assume the country is India.
Sabine
I
has
raised my hand and asked, I would love to hear some reflections from students, if you remember any, on that final question. I find that really powerful as a question. What do your students say?
One of the most common comments, not necessarily a question, but common comments from students I have is, but there are no aid workers in the novel. So my US American students are deeply shocked. How can development happen without them? They have so much to offer to the world. They are so eager to do service work and international learning experiences. And this guy, you, or this, well, person, you, manages to get filthy rich in rising Asia, and you, the student, have nothing to do with it. That is really, really disempowering. And I think that's a wonderful takeaway point for students in the United States.
9:30.
All right, we're at time. Thank you so much. That's such a great way to get us started.